Welcome back to another episode of the Public Works Podcast, where we highlight the people working behind the scenes to keep our communities in motion and sometimes our planes in the air, which we'll talk about today. I'm Shane Silsby, your host for this episode. Most of the infrastructure we cover on this show is what people use without even thinking about it: roads, water, wastewater, flood issues. Airports may be one of the exceptions. And airports, one piece of the public infrastructure people have a lot of opinions about. Sometimes, like roads, people have a driver's license, so they think they know how to design a road. At airports, because they fly in planes, maybe they think they should tell you how to design them. But they remember the weight of security, whether the terminal was clean, whether their bag showed up. Running an airport is a public works job with a direct audience that's using your facility every day. And my guest today has done all of that at just about every size and shape of airport there is. Barry, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Shane. It's really great to be here. Thank you for inviting me on.
Certainly. And we'll talk a little bit as we go through this, Barry, but you and I worked together at the County of Orange for a little bit there. The listeners will figure that out, so I was excited to catch up with you. If you wouldn't mind just giving our audience a quick version of kind of who you are and what you're up to now.
Sure, thanks. After a 30-something year career in the public sector running airports from, as you said, the smallest of the small to the fourth busiest airport on the planet through operations, and then ultimately John Wayne Airport, I have gone to the private sector, and I now am CEO of the Aeroplex Aerolease Group, which is an airport real estate firm. So we have long-term leases on a couple of different airports, and on those leases, we have built hangars and FBO spaces, office buildings, and at this point, we lease those out. I tell my airport management friends, I say, it's a lot like running an airport. You have capital improvement, you have renters, you have agreements, but without any of the hard stuff. It's fantastic. It's a nice way to end my career.
Yeah, that's great. And I always enjoy chatting with people who are in former leadership in public service and then shift over to private, because you're still busy. There's still a lot of stress, but the pressure is different. Maybe it's more pressure than stress because you got that 24/7 kind of pressure lifted off you a little bit, the politics stripped away somewhat. But it's unlikely that someone would grow up saying, I want to be an airport director. Some people might say, I want to be a pilot, I want to fly across the world. But how did you find your way into aviation first? And what's the kind of the short version of the path getting you to where you are today?
Yeah, great question. Really fantastic. And I love to hear other people's paths as well, because it's not usually a straight path that somebody gets into. For me, I just wanted to fly jets in the Air Force. That was really as far as I could see. And when that was time to end, I really had no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up. So I tried a bunch of different things. I ran a small construction company for a bit. I applied and interviewed with the CIA, which is one of the stories in the book that I think people will find interesting and fun. But I kept longing to get back to aviation. And so after a couple of years of banging around, I took a job at one of the County of Los Angeles airports. They have 5 airports there, small GA airports. The one I went to work for was Whiteman in Pacoima. And here I was, a college graduate. A few months earlier, I'm flying supersonic jets, and I'm working doing airport maintenance and pumping gas into Cessnas and Pipers. But I was back around airports, aviation again, and that was really where my passion was. We had an assistant airport manager that was more interested in talking with pilots than he was in doing the airport work. So I got an opportunity to do his work, and I was pretty good at it, and I liked it. One day, the airport manager came in with a job announcement for a little place called Lampa in Central Coast of California, and he said, I think you should apply for this job. And so I did, and what do you know, they hired me. And then I went to a little bigger airport, and one day I was running operations at LAX.
That's awesome. Yeah, in GA, right, if you want to define the aviation classes for us a little bit, we might talk about those in the show if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. So general aviation, it would be like the small airport you see in your neighborhood someplace where single engine light twins take off and land. It will not likely have any commercial service at all. The next level would be something called a non-hub airport, where you still have a lot of general aviation, but you might have some commercial aviation, like the SkyWest stuff or the small commuter aircraft. Then you have a small hub, which is something like a Santa Barbara or a Fresno, Long Beach. Medium hub, which is like John Wayne was. And then large hub would be your mega airports like LAX and Chicago O'Hare, et cetera.
Great. Appreciate that. And as you talk about different experiences, people can now maybe understand how those work into the skill of the airports. But you're also a licensed pilot, which is interesting. Does that change how you run an airport? Do you see the airfield differently than someone who just came up through engineering or finance or business?
Well, first, Shane, once a pilot, always a pilot.
Got it.
Interestingly enough, about 6 months ago, after 30 years of not flying, I started flying again. And it's been worth the wait. You start having kids and buying houses, and time and money just become an impediment, but I'm back. So I think you see the airfield a little different from a pilot's perspective. It might be helpful here to explain what it is an airport guy does. I get
Sure.
questions from my good friends all the time. What does that mean? What do you do? So you think about an airport, there's taxiways and runways, there's roadways, there's terminals, there's an air traffic control tower, there's all kinds of businesses. Well, the county or the city or the special district that owns the airport owns all of that. That ground, the terminals, the roadways, all that stuff belongs to that entity. And what we do is we manage it. So we have a police force, we have firefighters, we have lawyers and accountants and finance professionals, architects, engineers. It's like running a small city. And then you have tenants like the concessionaires, the FAA, the TSA, all the airlines would be your tenant. A lot of people think that it's the airlines that run the airport, and it really isn't. They're just another tenant. So yeah, from the perspective of going out and doing marking and signage and lighting on the airfield, probably better to have a pilot's license than not. But I think mostly it's probably just street cred. People hear you at an airport and they go, oh, he's a pilot. And if you're not, then you kind of take a little hit.
Okay. Oh, that's cool. We'll have to go up sometime. You're playing a choice. You'll have to let me know. We can get up in the air a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
So on your career side, who took a chance on you early on? I think you mentioned this person may have recommended you to go to Lompoc, but every career seems to have that person. Who was yours, and what did they see that I think in this case recommended you look for another role?
Yeah, I guess it would probably lean to my first boss in Lompoc. His name was Larry McPherson. Larry was a public works director, pretty apt for the show here.
Yeah.
He was fantastic, a great leader that led through personal experience and just the way he carried himself. I remember a particular time that I was just overwhelmed, 28 years old or something like that. And there were things I didn't know, I didn't understand. I didn't want to make a decision. I was nervous, and I was basically asking him to make the decision for me. He stood up, walked me back to my office, pointed at the airport layout plan hanging on the wall and the model bus, because we also had the transit system under my position. And he said, "These are yours, manage them." And he left. So he forced me to do what I didn't want to do, which was make a decision and try and possibly fail. But he was always there with the safety net when I did make the mistake. I remember his eyes would go back and forth, which meant he was thinking about something. And he would get in his Rolodex and he'd make a phone call and just say, "Okay, you're good, go." And that was the long and short of it. It didn't take away the ownership of the mistake or the failure, but it protected my career and allowed me to be riskier, right? To take the next risk and the next one, which I think is absolutely imperative.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you were talking about small airports there. As we jump over to that, you mentioned you're doing everything, you're responsible for everything, but also air service development is part of that. And do you want to chat about that being kind of a marketer or kind of a sales job? You're pitching airlines and coming to your spot. What can actually move a carrier to shift airports besides just knowing Barry? What else gets them to jump over to your airport?
Knowing me has no bearing whatsoever in that decision. It really is about dollars and cents, right? Can you demonstrate to the air carrier that they can make a profit on day one coming into your airport? And even then, it's not a guarantee that they will come in. Even if you could show them they're going to make tens of millions of dollars, if you don't fit their growth plan, if you don't fit their size of aircraft, right? Because at a smaller airport, you're going to need a smaller airplane. If you don't fit their geographical interests, they're just not going to come in. So you have to first find that list of airlines that have you or your type of airport, your region in their growth plans, and then go pitch them and show them how you can make them money right out of the gate.
Interesting. Thank you for that perspective. I don't think people would know or consider that. They just go to the airport, there's an airline there.
I can't tell you how many times when I was at Stockton trying to get air service, people would say, why don't you just call Southwest and tell them to come in? Like it would be that easy. And it really is a very complex, data-driven business.
Yeah, we seem to hear that a lot for international destinations too. I just want to go to that place, just bring them in. Yeah, I'm sure
Right.
a lot that goes into that. But at small airports, which we're talking about now, I want to talk about the people that help you do all that. What did that teach you being at a small airport about building a bench, how to hire and develop people when you can't just pay everybody the maximum amount and bring in whoever you want because there's a lot of competition, the airport sizes we talked about. So how do you get that team together and keep recruiting?
Yeah, another fantastic question. First of all, you're doing it all, basically. You might have an admin person and a couple of maintenance folks and maybe an ops person or two, and the rest is basically you. So you're doing planning, you're doing development, you're writing grants, you're dealing with the politics, you're planning the airport master plan, you're writing that or hiring a consultant to do that. You're doing all the developmental work, extending runways and building things. So it's a very busy job, but it gives you the opportunity to do so many different things. And it's really helpful in your career later because you've seen it all, as opposed to somebody that comes into a bigger airport and they always stay in operations or planning their whole career. They don't get to see the finance side or what have you. So it's tough. But when you do start getting to a little bit bigger airports and a little more people on the staff, it is important to empower them and to help them grow in their career, not only for themselves, but so that they make it easier on you. One of the gifts that God has given me is the ability to build high performance teams. And it was just something that kind of came natural to me. In every place I had the pleasure of going, I was able to elevate the teams, to get them to believe that they could do more than they ever thought was possible, and then to work together as a team to do that. In my mind, Magic Johnson was one of the best basketball players that ever played the game. Not because he was a great athlete, which he was, not because he was incredibly intelligent, which he is, but because he knew the high point of all of his team members' games. And he would feed them the ball right at that key point to make them look better and to inspire them and to help the team score points. So that's the kind of leadership I always try to bring along is play to people's strengths, minimize their weaknesses, get them the training that they need so that those weaknesses become strengths, and just motivate them and help them realize that there's more, there's growth.
Good points. A couple of just observations there. One, I appreciate you bringing up Magic Johnson and my Michigan State. You can see my basketball right here. Appreciate that.
I wasn't pandering. Pandering.
It's all good. Also, I think the Air Force probably teaches you a lot about teams, right? It's all about one big team. And then I agree with you, working at smaller agencies. I kind of started my career at a smaller agency where I was doing a lot of things. It gives you that perspective and I think appreciation for those doing all those jobs. And not that you know every detail of every job, but you kind of have a feel, and those people have work to do, and those things are important as well. So I think I agree with you there. As we move up, right? So now we're up to like Sacramento, LAX. How do you think about leading change when the distance between you and those teams and the work gets that big? So you can't touch it all in one day. You can't talk to all those teams in one day. Stuff just starts to separate a little bit more and the scale goes up. How do you lead in that environment?
Yeah, I think it's about empowering people, hiring good people and getting out of their way to let them do their job, but monitoring, making sure you're getting what you think you're getting, training people, helping them adapt to new situations, recognizing talent and growth in people and giving them the next opportunity. So it's really, you do less and less. And I know you experience this as well. You shift to setting a vision and helping people understand why their role in that vision is important, and setting a tone and trying to empower people and show them the next step. And then you monitor like crazy. You read reports, you find out what folks are doing and how they're spending their time. You go out and you talk a lot, right? You visit with your team and do your best to help them understand your vision and for you to understand their problems and their needs.
Yeah, really interesting there. And there's a lot of oversight on it, right? Because airports are public assets. So I'm sure when people go to the mall or something, they lodge a complaint. It's with one person in customer service, maybe. But when you are dealing with public assets, those complaints can go anywhere all the time at all different levels, come back to you. So you did a lot there. Is there anything else you want to mention about LAX in general? I know the book goes deep into your role there as director of operations and just the scale of that before we shift over to JWA. Anything else you want to mention about LAX?
Yeah, first of all, when I got there, I thought I was going there to run operations at the fourth or fifth busiest airport on the planet. What I didn't anticipate was the scale of redevelopment. While I was there, and you'll understand this as well as anybody or better than most people, we put in a new central utility plant while the old one was still operating. One of the guys in development, Roger Johnson, had a great quote. He said, "It's like doing open heart surgery on a guy running a marathon."
Yeah.
But we built terminals or expanded terminals and extended new taxiways and did runway work. And I mean, the scale was just off the charts as far as what we were developing and running an airport, running the operations of an airport while you're doing airfield work is a truly challenging environment.
For sure. Thank you for that. Shifting over to John Wayne Airport, personal to me, this is the airport I use a lot. The planes fly over my house.
Sorry.
Yeah, well, down the street, there's plenty of well-off, affluent people. I'm not in that band, but many that have a lot of strong opinions and might think, well, I move in here, so the airport has to stop operations because I came to town. So it's interesting. There are probably other smaller or mid-sized airports that deal with a lot of these kind of neighborhood type issues, but this one seems to be unique because it has pretty significant volumes, I think, for a small footprint. It has curfew. It has this community engagement issue, noise. How much of that job at JWA was about trying to run an airport versus dealing with diplomacy of being surrounded by these neighborhoods?
Yeah, it is a tough noise environment. There's something called the Airport Noise and Capacity Act of 1990. It was where Congress said, hey, airports, you cannot have your own noise rules. You cannot have, they're trying to avoid is this patchwork quilt of different rules at different airports. So they said that's the FAA's to deal with, and you may not do that. However, at John Wayne Airport, the settlement agreement that we had with the community predated that. So all of our rules were grandfathered in, as you say, curfews and noise limits and having to have sensors and certain hours of operations, et cetera, was guided by this settlement agreement and could never go away, which made us probably the most heavily regulated airport in the country. Yeah, so a lot of that was exactly what you say, going out and talking to neighborhood groups, noise sensitive groups, explaining what you're doing, how the monitoring works, why there's certain noise at certain points, all of that. Also with the local politicians who have constituents that are noise sensitive. So a lot of it was less about how do we restripe the runway or how do we rebuild the terminal and how do we help people understand what it is we do and the importance of why we do it.
Yeah, I think people may not appreciate that with public infrastructure. Standardization and consistency is important for safety. When we drive on roads from state to state, the road design doesn't really change that much. You don't have to have a license in all 50 states to drive on those because the infrastructure looks the same. I'm guessing similarly with airports, how people use it is one aspect, but how pilots use it, you don't want them to have to really strain or stretch what they're trying to accomplish by takeoff and landing 10 times in a day. I would guess you want it to be somewhat similar.
Absolutely. And there's this idea that airlines are multi-billion dollar international corporations. And if they have to have different equipment for every airport they fly into, it would just be untenable. It's that as well.
Yeah, good points. Under your leadership, John Wayne Airport was named best airport, medium-sized, all these different awards. I'm going to ask you to pick one or two because there's a lot to list, but awards like that are usually a lagging indicator of something that started years earlier, right? You do the things, then you get recognized for it later. So what were one or two of your favorite awards and what was actually driving that recognition?
Great question again. You're knocking it out of the park. I would say the JD Power North American Guest Experience Survey. Before I came, we had never cracked the top 15 of that survey. I arrived in November of 2015, and by the following September, we vaulted to number 8 on that list. And the next 2 years, 2017 and 2018, we were the top large airport for guest satisfaction in all of North America. So you're right, it is a lagging thing. While we saw immediate movement on the list, there was still work to be done. And culture change is slow. It's a slow process. What we did is we started talking about it. When I arrived, I said there are 3 goals that we have. We want to be safe and secure, we want to be a good neighbor, and we want to provide a superior guest experience. And we really hammered those 3 things home, especially the last one. And we trained to it. We monitored it. We talked a lot about what does superior guest experience look like. You could find me in the terminals pretty much every day, picking up trash or putting away a stray wheelchair. And the idea was modeling behavior, right? If my team saw me doing it, if the airport director does it, I guess I should be doing it, right?
Yeah.
And it actually picked up even more momentum than that. I would watch airline ticket agents putting away wheelchairs or TSA agents picking up trash on the floor. They didn't have to do that. That wasn't their job. But we talked about this is your living room, right? You're going to have guests over all day, every day. You don't want your living room to look like a wreck. So if we all work together, we can make this thing something truly sensational. I have this video that we had from one of our surveillance cameras that shows a sheriff's deputy carrying bags for an older lady across the street to her car. And that was the moment that I knew that it was taking hold, right? Everybody cared about the guest experience.
Interesting leadership strategies. They talk about what gets measured gets improved. That was one of your 3 pillars. You focused on it. You had a great outcome. Proof is in the pudding right there. And congratulations to you and the team on that.
Thank you.
Now, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about public sector versus private sector. So you're in the private sector now. We led off with that a little bit. I was in the public sector for 20 years. You were there 30 years or so. You started, must be when you were 5 or 6. And congratulations on your quick ascension. What does the public sector do well that it doesn't get credit for? And where does that model generally slow you down when you're trying to do things at airports?
I think one thing that the public sector is incredibly good at is meeting regulations, and the myriad of regulators with federal, state, local, coastal commissions, water control boards, etc. There are so many regulations. I think the average person would be really shocked to see the regulatory environment that we work with in the public sector. So I think we do that very good. I say we, but the public sector does that incredibly well, and most people don't have an appreciation for it. As far as where does it slow you down, throughout my career, I never felt as though I was working in the public sector. I mean, I reported to city councils and boards of supervisors, et cetera, and definitely was in the public sector. But airports are businesses. They're fast moving, agile things that have to keep going every day, all day, and react very quickly to things that don't go right. I always would joke about my public sector time that we were like airport directors or managers or what have you, we're like NFL place kickers. You sit at the end of the bench, nobody truly appreciates or understands what you do, and you're probably more comfortable talking with other place kickers than you are the rest of the team. We're just the odd duck that operates very differently than the rest of the public sector.
Good point. If your business is running well and you're having more revenues than expenses, good, right? Every other department is typically running at a deficiency because it's tax funded and can't control its revenues to the same extent. But every budget time, you get to come down and the place kicker shows up to make that kick with all the rest of the departments or through procurements. At Orange County and all your jobs in the public sector, you reported to somewhat through or to elected officials. Orange County has a 5-member board that obviously is looking out for its constituents. But what did you learn about the relationship as you got into leadership roles and dealing with elected officials? And how does that dynamic work when perhaps elected officials or offices are stepping into an area that is like a business or something highly technical, and they want to get more engaged in that for whatever reason? How do you try to balance that?
Yeah, as you well know, it's incredibly difficult. I had to say no a lot more than I would have liked to have. Airports are, as you pointed out, are businesses and enterprise funds, and they make a lot of money. We had something like 3 years worth of cash reserves when COVID hit. And for that exact reason, I knew something bad was coming down the road at some point and we better have some money. But politicians see that and they say, well, why can't I use some of that to fund a homeless shelter or a park? And as much as those are altruistic things and great things, I had to say no. It'd be against federal law and we'd likely be sued. But more importantly, we would be in violation of that federal law. All money made on airports must stay on airports. Now, there are creative ways that I saw politicians try to get that money. Part of it would be having a layered organization above the airport to which you have to pay an overhead for doing the same work that you would have done anyway. You're hiring the same contracts, and now you're just paying a 15% overhead for the pleasure of working through somebody. Also, over and over, I saw where contracts were desired to be steered, high dollar contracts. There was a desire to steer them to somebody that a politician knew. One thing I know very well is that it costs a lot of money to respond to a request for proposals or request for qualifications, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And a lot of work and staffing goes into that. And when you rank those responses, you do it based on the value that they can bring to the airport and the strength of the company and all of that. And when somebody tries to tell you, you shouldn't pick number one, you should pick number five, because that's my brother-in-law's company or whatever the reason is, I chafed at that. And it didn't get me a lot of points with some of my bosses.
Right. I mean, this dives into a whole area with another show with a lot of offline chats, I'm sure, but it's difficult because two people are having a conversation, but one of those people is responsible for the outcome of the decision. And that's the directors of the departments, right? They have to carry that out. And you don't get to come back later as a director and say, well, I told you all we shouldn't have picked that person or that team. It doesn't work that way. You get served the lemons and you got to make lemonade out of that. So that's the challenge. One party has effectively more authority, but the other party has more responsibility in the delivering the outcome. So it's tough. It's tough to be sure.
The way you just put that is perfect.
There you go. That doesn't mean I was good at it, but it happens that way. So kind of like I did, you had all that fun on the public side, and then you get an opportunity to shift over to the private side. What's the biggest culture shock there, or just daily differential that hits you? And what do consultants consistently get wrong about maybe trying to interact or provide services back to a public agency?
Well, that first part of your question is a great one. I used to tell people that 85% of my job was the best job on the entire planet. The 15% where I had those awkward interactions with the board were probably the worst part of any job. Being on the public side, you have to deal with the politics, with the politicians, and decisions that are made not in the best interest of the airport, what you were just saying, but in the best interest of that politician or that board or whatever policy that they're trying to get through. So the lack of political, I'm going to say a bad word here, but political interference with the business on a day-to-day basis is such a refreshing thing. I don't know that it's culture shock, but it is certainly very welcome.
Yeah.
And as far as consultants, I think consultants do a pretty good job of doing their homework and trying to figure out how best to meet the needs of whether it's public or private, and showing up when they need to show up and doing the right things. I don't know that they miss it. I do know they spend a lot of money trying to meet our needs.
For sure. The other thing that reflects on how I can spend the hours of my day now is that 15% you mentioned that's kind of administrative or trying to prepare or work within the framework of the government agency. A lot of that preparation is just to put something out in front of the public, right? Because it has to be almost perfect, right? And when you're trying to make something perfect, it takes time, it takes iterations, it takes different drafts. And on the private side, I don't think you necessarily have that. You want something to be good, but you're the professional. So what you say is the product. So you put that out and you don't always have to spend hours and hours to reiterate and wordsmith and double check. So I think that is just maybe a productivity boost on the private side where you can just get that thing done and move on.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think the one more word I would have added is defend. Defend that decision, that thing. That takes a ton of time. In the private sector, as you know well, if it doesn't advance the business, if it doesn't improve the bottom line, it's fluff and it's wasted time. Government's not like that at all. The show is the important thing. And if you happen to also be efficient, hey, that's great.
Yeah, I had an elected official tell me once when I was trying to push some efficiency initiatives, because my viewpoint is in government, if you're not always trying to move forward, status quo is not really the status quo. You're going to be falling behind, right? Governments are always behind the private sector. And I remember this discussion where the person said to me, Shane, you're focused on the wrong thing. He said, governments are not meant to be efficient. You introduce policy, you introduce regulations, you introduce people, you introduce the public, you introduce these meetings. It's not meant to be efficient. And that's the point. So I did learn a little lesson there. It didn't really change my mindset about trying to be efficient, but maybe to understand that the public involvement, the elected officials representing their constituents, the rules, the regulations, all that stuff was put in place for some reason. And so that's the world you live in. But I would just advise folks, don't let that be the end of your day. That doesn't mean you can't try to work on something that came through an audit or try to make a process better, because if you don't do those things, you have all the efficiency things pushing against it anyway. The whole process will slow down even further if you're not trying to make some advancements along the way. So anyway, interesting feedback I got from one of the elected officials. But flipping this around now, what do you think that public agencies get wrong about working with consultants or the private sector folks?
Yeah, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I think the biggest thing is the lack of awareness and understanding of just what goes into trying to respond to our RFIs, RFQs, RFPs, whatever alphabet you want to use, but you'll get responses from 10 companies, right? And you're only going to pick one of those. So those other 9, they get up to bat and they swing and they miss, not because they're not companies, but because somebody just edged them out by one little decimal point, right? That's a lot to bear for a company. And I just don't think most government folks have an appreciation for that.
Yeah, especially on the service side, right? You're being selected on the most qualified.
Right.
They're all probably qualified, so you're selecting the most qualified, and that gets tough because a lot of people can have perspectives on that. Any advice you might have for somebody that is thinking about shifting from a career in the public sector to a career in the private sector?
Well, I guess if you have a passion for airports, don't go to the private sector. There's not very many airports that are run by the private sector. But if that's not something that keeps you locked into government, like running airports, then I would just say the pay is better. It's more streamlined, more efficient, a little more cutthroat. If you don't produce, you don't stick around too long. But I wouldn't dissuade anybody from doing it. Each one has its own benefits, right? Public versus private. They're both good. They're both necessary. I would go back and forth and recommend to somebody that they go back and forth to enhance their career. But what I tell a lot of young people getting their first airport, I think it transfers into just about any leadership position. I tell them, don't do what you like and don't do what you're good at. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, but most of the time, especially early in careers, what you are good at or what you like isn't the most important thing for that operation. Maybe later in your career, you get to do that, but early on, figure out what your new airport or your new operation, what the 2 or 3 most important things that airport needs or that business needs, and get really good at those things. And now you got a new skill set that you can put in your backpack for the next gig, and you pick up some more there and so on.
Yeah, good points. And that leads me into my next line of questioning. You're talking about the 6 P's there, right? That shows up in your book here. We have a copy of your book. And maybe you could start with this title. I'll let you describe it, Barry. I know you talk about it in the book, but I'll just hold this up and maybe you want to just tell people how this came to be.
Yeah, not too bad for a skinny white kid. It has nothing to do with race. Let me just clear that. It's not meant to be a discussion about race or even mention it other than that was my reality. I was an undersized, little asthmatic, skinny kid living in kind of a rough neighborhood and just trying to figure out my way through life. I'll just tell you a quick story. Do you remember Scott Hagan, Deputy Director of Operations at the airport?
I read about him in your book. I don't
Yeah.
remember working with Scott directly.
Scott wrote a book and I got it and I read it and I was impressed by it. And I spent a lot of time thinking about it. And I was having a conversation with my youngest daughter, Katie, and she asked me, "Hey, Dad, would you ever write a book?" And I said, "Well, I thought about it, but where do you get started with something like that? How do you get it done?" I said, "But I already have the title. I've lived this title my whole life." So that's kind of how it came about.
Interesting. And I read the early chapters about the 6Ps, and then the later chapters, which were related to Orange County and things like that, were interested. I'll get to the rest, but I just got it yesterday, so we're getting through it. But why write the book now, Barry? And who's the reader you had in mind? Aviation, anybody trying to build a career, longevity, strategic principles? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it really just started as a work for my daughters to help them understand my faith and career trajectory and understand what their old man did all those years when he wasn't at home and why the long hours and all of that. And it just sort of grew legs and became something a little more. And then I started seeing those 6Ps pop up over and over. I really didn't start out to write about leadership or accomplishment or the 6Ps. It just sort of happened organically. And the more I wrote, the more I saw a pattern. It was one of those aha moments, an epiphany, where I said, holy cow, this has been guiding me my whole life. And I'm just now starting to put it together. I've got a position where it's not a 60-hour work week like at John Wayne or LAX or Sacramento. So I had a little more time to do it. And I figured if I don't do it now, I just won't ever do it.
Yeah, that's great. And I got advice going through my career from people in the military and others, and they said, look, leaders speak, leaders write. So I think it's important that leaders are writing and speaking like we're doing today, which, by the way, video medium is the number one way that people get their information. So that's why we're giving you this information through video. The book, when I was looking through it, it's got some also interesting personal stories in there. And we talk about the 6Ps, the principles. Then it shifts over to, I think, the second part of your title, which is When the Map Burns, where it talks about how things can change quickly, or sometimes you don't know it, and maybe folks don't know, but in many cases, when you're in a director position or leadership positions, you're appointed or at will, and you have all that responsibility, but you have a limited parachute, if you will. There's very little security, and that can go away any day. So at the end of the book, you talk about that, and really my question is just, what were your thoughts in going from maybe a little bit more strategy technical to bringing it all home with the personal part of it as the transitions happened at the end of the public sector career?
Well, I have personal stories throughout the entire book. You'll see things that happen along the way and trying to make sense out of them and recreate yourself after you fall down and skin your knees and getting back up and keeping going. Resilience and persistence are themes throughout the book. But I think it's really important for people not to read, here's how I was famously successful throughout my entire career and nothing ever went wrong. I never had to change tactics. It was just a lovely experience, because nobody's life is like that. I'm pretty vulnerable in the book at certain points in my life when things just really came apart, and searching for the next step and the next day, and not looking a year or 5 years ahead, but looking at getting up the next day and soldiering on, because stopping isn't an option. But taking that next step when you really don't know what that next step looks like or where it's taking you, it's important for people to understand that everybody goes through that and there's a way through it. And here's some principles to help you get there.
Yes. And what I liked about some of your thoughts on that in dealing with disruptions or when things don't always go your way is your discussion on planning, where say, look, you set the long-term plan, you set the goal out, you set some things in place, but if the goal is far enough out and it's still applicable, things can happen that might not be perfect, but you can look at it, okay, does that completely avoid me being able to get to that goal? And if not, you're working around it, right? Nothing's easy, otherwise everybody would do it. And or taking that in and saying, do I need to adjust my goal? Is this still what I want to achieve? And so those were some things I thought were interesting in how to deal with when things don't exactly go perfectly.
Yep. Nobody's plan stays intact completely.
For sure. And I think that's a great message, especially for the newer generations coming into the workforce who are unlikely to have a career at an agency for 25 years. Things are going to happen. The private sector, as you said, can be cutthroat for no reason of anything that you've done on your own. People can lose their position and need to be able to reframe it and reset. So I think that's good. You're giving advice here today, but what's the best piece of career advice that you ever got, Barry?
I'm not sure that I have an answer for that. So many people helped me along the way and were mentors and leaders and teachers, and even the detractors and the people that try to harm you teach you something, right? So there's so much. I don't know that I could pinpoint one. I'll tell you just a funny story. I did work briefly for a general manager at an airport, and he was a marketing brochure, slick on the outside, good looking, but really no depth. And he taught me two things that actually have helped me, but the only two things he ever taught me. And that was, one, always dress well. And two, never accept the money that they're offering. Ask for more. Those are two big pieces of advice. And they actually have served me pretty well.
Yeah, no, that's great. Don't always expect in the public sector, but in the private sector, yeah, you can do some of that. That's good. Appreciate that. And other than advice, it sounds like some of the people along the way, they gave you opportunities to do things. So that might be where you got that experience. One thing about airports that would surprise a passenger that's just walking through the terminal, what don't people know that would surprise them?
I think what we call the interstitial area, the area below the terminal where all the inline baggage systems are and the TSA equipment, and just a confusing web of pathways for your luggage to go on, and all of the things that are under there, chaseways and plumbing and all this stuff. There's more underground beneath the terminal than you see above. It's staggering is what it is.
Yeah, interesting. People probably don't think about how that's used, because most airports you have to get up to a second level anyway, because that's how you're going to enter the airplane. So everything, the whole machine, the whole system is working underneath that. This question is about 25-year-old Barry, or 22, or whenever you were able to head to the workforce. What's one sentence you would offer him for the future?
Very cool question. I think I would put my arm around young me and say, relax. It's not going to be as hard as you think it's going to be. Just make good decisions, do the right thing, make sure you can live with who you are every day of your life, and you don't do something that you're really going to regret later. And that would be about it.
Yeah, good advice. Yeah, good advice. Especially as you get into leadership positions, right? There's a lot of push and pull, and so that's good. Well, Barry, it's been great to catch up. I appreciate this conversation. You've been a tenement in the industry for at least 3 decades, and we're glad to be able to share some of that experience with you. And because you put that in a book, people can read about that now as well. If you wouldn't mind closing us out a little bit here, Barry, where people can find more information about the book or follow what you're up to. A little commercial here at the end.
Yeah, thanks, Shane. The book's on Amazon. It's both a paperback and an ebook. So you can just go to Amazon and put in Not Too Bad for a Skinny White Kid, and it'll take you right to the book. By the way, I'm really excited to say over the weekend, we launched on Thursday. By Friday morning, we were a #1 bestseller, and we stayed that way through the weekend, and hopefully we're still there, but that is not completely typical. Let me just say it that way.
Yeah.
Exciting.
Yeah, that's cool. And it's ironic that when I got your notice that you had published, I was sitting in an airport, I think at the Dallas airport or somewhere, trying to get to my next destination, and I was delayed by 3 hours. And I thought Barry should be here running this place and getting this figured out. So yeah, that was cool.
I got a joke for you, Shane.
Yeah, go ahead.
Guy walks up to the airline ticket counter and he says, hey, I want to go to Chicago, but I want one of my bags to go to Dallas, another to go to Minneapolis, and a third one to go to Buffalo Airport. And the lady says, sir, we can't do that. And he goes, why not? You did it on my last flight.
There you go. Yeah, exactly. Thanks. So that's your next book, Aviation Industry Jokes that you can tell while you're waiting in the terminal for your next flight. Anything else you want to mention, Barry, about how people can connect with you? You talked about the book, but you and your company?
Yeah, if I can be of any assistance to you, please feel free to email me. It's a very simple email, Barry, Barry, at aeroplex.net. I'm happy to take your email and respond. And if I can move your career along and help you, I'm happy to do so.
That's great. And with that, Barry, thanks again for joining us today. And to everyone listening, remember to thank your local public works professional, especially those in the aviation industry, as we talked about today. They're trying to get you safely where you're going and coming from and making sure you have a good experience. And the public works profession in general is keeping our communities in motion, keeping you safe, trying to give you a good quality of life. I've been your host for this episode, Shane Silsby, and thank you for watching this show and the Public Works Podcast, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
Joseph here, Public Works Podcast.
Shane here as well.
All right, so you just watched some cool content. All we need from you is to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. It helps us get the message out. It helps us propagate the gospel of public works. So if you have free time, which you probably have 2 or 3 seconds, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button so more people can follow us.
That's right. All we're trying to do is highlight the public works industry.
That's it.
Make those professionals trying to improve your communities look good and raise awareness and credibility of public works.
Yes.
It's easy to do.
Once again, thanks for watching. If you have any content ideas, if you have any questions, please put them in the comments, and Shane or I will answer them within a week of you putting it in there, and we'll get you the answer that you need.
Thank you very much.